Hey guys, back with the studio build video. Today we're just making a basic XLR cable. So I was about to make a very short patch cable for studio use, and I decided to show you guys how to make one. All right, let's go. All right, so we're at the workstation. Of course, to be able to perform these types of studio builds, you are going to need some tools. First and foremost, you're going to need a soldering iron of some sort. It doesn't have to be a soldering station. As long as the temperature goes up to 300, between 300 to 400 degrees Celsius, it should be good. Of course, if you can get something with interchangeable tips, that's really good for maintenance. And sometimes changing tips will make it easier for you depending on the audio component that you're trying to solder. Sometimes pointed tips work better, sometimes chiseled tips work better. I'm touching this right now because the station is not on yet. All right, it hasn't been turned on yet. So just take note, this thing can get really hot. Don't touch it when it's turned on, okay? So we're gonna turn it on now so that while I walk you through, it's gonna warm up. Of course, if you have your soldering iron, you're gonna need your solder itself. I won't get too much into the details, but generally there are two types, well, at least the types that I've used throughout the years. It's the 1 millimeter diameter, the one on the left, and the 0.8 millimeter on the right. It looks really similar to the naked eye, but trust me, when you need to solder a joint that needs a lot of solder, you're gonna want to feed it with the 1 millimeter solder, and then for the smaller types of connections that you want to make, the 0.8 will do, right? Okay, aside from solder, we are going to need, of course, a pair of good wire cutters, okay? A pair of good pliers, of course, electronics pliers and electronics cutter, of course. Multimeter, digital multimeter of some sort. We're just going to use it for continuity testing, okay? And then, yeah, it's a little bit of flux paste. It'll help the solder flow through the joints or through the contact points that you want to solder. Of course, you're going to need your connectors. So for today, we are working with XLR connectors. These aren't brand new. I'll just be reusing them. They've seen a fair bit of field use, but they'll now be retired to studio use. Of course, you need a female and a male connector. How do you know? The male connector has 3 pins and the female connector has 3 holes, okay? The brands I trust are Neutrik. These are Neutrik female connectors. And Amphenol. Amphenol is another brand that I trust. So, and of course, you're going to need your audio cable. Any 2-core audio cable will do. Some of the brands that I'm familiar with and that I like and that I trust are Nobel from Japan, and the rest are German brands like Quantum Pro, Strands, and this is Summer. All good cables, both for field use and studio use. All right, let's talk about the cable connectors first. Let's focus on the female plug. So most XLR connectors are pretty standard. They twist open. There you go. And they usually break out into 4 parts, okay? And usually You have the boot, the one at the far end. Then you have the cable clamp, right? Some people call it the chuck. You have the insert, which is the actual internal part of the XLR connector, and then you have the outer casing, right? Those are the four general parts of your female connector. For your male connector, it'll also break out into similar four parts. It does twist open too. So as you can see, this has a cable which we cut already because it's been used in the field. So this is the boot. As you can see, it's pretty much worn out already. Yep. So those are the four parts, right? So you have your boot, your cable clamp, your internal 3-pin, and then your outer casing. A 2-core cable usually looks like this. Of course, it depends from manufacturer to manufacturer, but we'll always have your shielding, your 2 cable cores for the signal. Usually the insulation is red and blue for your hot and cold signal, your positive and negative signal. And then you have some form of cable filling, at least that's what I call it. This is just cotton, and it just runs through the entire cable. This is the outer jacket, and it just gives the cable a little bit of form, and I wouldn't say rigidity, but it protects all these signal cables on the inside, right? I'll be doing 50 centimeter cables for today. Right, so I'll be stripping these cables. So as you can see, that's what it looks like on a freshly stripped jacket. You usually have the shielding wrapping around the twisted pair of signal cables. So you basically just separate them all. You can cut the cotton already, you don't need that. Then you can strip these cables. We'll just strip it with a regular piece of cable strippers. Yep, and that should be good. That cable is prepped already for your soldering. So I'll just be doing that to all the cables. All right, so once you strip both ends of your cable, you want to check for continuity first, just to make sure the cable is still intact, especially if you're just reusing cables from the field. So usually testers will beep if there's continuity, right? So you just want to check red on red, blue on blue, and your ground. Your shielding. Right, so that means That's a good cable. All right, so we've got all our cable connectors ready. Now we're going to solder first cable. So let's pick a pair. So we'll be using this pair. And first things first, get your cable. Let's do the female end first. You always want to insert the boot first. Do not forget to insert the boot. Because once you've soldered this cable to the insert, there's going to be no way to get this boot into the cable. All right, so you always want to insert your boot into your cable first. All right. Next, let's talk about wiring. Even on this old connector, you will find numbers on the connection point. As you can see there, you've got on your left, number 1, on your right, number 2, and then at the bottom, number 3, as you can see. This is on the female insert. On the male insert, you can see it right there on top of the connectors. On the left, it's 1. On the right, it's 2. That means the top is 3. Okay? So all connectors, at least XLR connectors, will have indicators which one is pin 1, which is pin 2, and which is pin 3 for both the male and the female connectors. So even though, for example, these plugs that I'm using, these guys have seen a lot of field use already, and you can still see the indicators. So, all right, let's get down to soldering. Let's do the female connector first. So what I usually do is get these helping hands of mine. All right, we know that pin 1 is on the right, pin 2 is on the left. So pin 1 is your shield, pin 2 is your hot signal, and pin 3 is your cold signal. So that's dry fitting the wires. There you go. You're ready to solder at that point. So you just get your soldering iron and your solder. Heat the area and start feeding solder until you get a good amount of it on the connection. And there you go. Looks like a good connection, right? Just make sure there are no fraying cables that are touching the other joints. Right now, we just soldered the cold connection. There's a loose wire here. Yeah, just make sure no small cables are touching any of the other connectors, right? So that looks like a good solder right there. So I'll just perform the same on the other 2 pins, and we'll proceed to the male connector. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. If it's your first time soldering, do not breathe in the fumes. So at the moment, I'm just using a fan here, an auxiliary fan. And yeah, I turned it off just so I can narrate over the video. But yeah, always have proper ventilation wherever you're soldering. And if you have a fume extractor of some kind, that would be best. So I'm gonna turn this on now. All right, so once that connection has been made, that's a very solid connection right there, no matter how much you try and pull on that, okay? You can close this up already, right? Just make sure to clean it up a bit. If you've got a few loose, small wires here and there that didn't get soldered, you should be good. So from here, you take your strain relief, right, your chuck. There's usually a guide on the insert. That will be that guide over there. And you can only insert this one way, right? Or in this case, you can insert it both ways. You can see I can place it that way, and I can also place it that way, the other way around. Okay, either case works, all right? Once you have that, you can pull the boot, okay? Or you can insert it towards the casing first. Now this usually has a guide. You'll notice that there's a notch, right, on the insert. And there are usually two notches over there. That's one notch. And then the other notch is over there. That's another notch. And when you look down the casing of the female XLR cable, you'll see that there are valleys. You've got one valley there up top. If I rotate it, there's the other one. There's one. The other one is to the left, that one. Yeah. So you basically just get your insert and line them up. You can get a feel for it, actually. If it's going in the wrong way, it won't push through. Okay? For example, if I try and push it that way, it will not go through, right? So just eyeball it, right? Feel for the groove, and it'll usually just slide into place. Once it's there, start twisting. You're gonna start hearing the chuck or the cable clamp. Every time you rotate this, it's going to get tighter and tighter, and that's because the cable clamp inside, every time you tighten the boot, it starts to crimp on the cable, creating a clamp, right? So make sure you just twist the butt all the way to the casing. And if you, the moment you reach the end, that's already a good plug right there, okay? All right, let's do the male end. All right, again, first things first, don't forget the boot. Get the boot inside first, because you won't have another opportunity to place that boot in there. Once you have the boot, double check your male insert. This case, pin number 1 is to my left. So just take a mental note of that. Number 1, pin number 1 is to my left, okay? Pin 1 is where shielding goes. Pin 2 is the hot signal. That will be the red cable. And pin 3 is the cold signal. So the wires are a bit long. I'm just gonna shave them off a bit. So we're gonna dry fit that. There you go. Once you dry fit them into place, just solder the connections. Careful, that's hot. I'm just checking. Yeah. At this point, before you close up the cable, you can definitely check for continuity, all right? If you connected the pins correctly. You can also see here on the outer face of the female connector that there are indicators of which pin is what. So when you test probe for continuity, you don't get confused. All right, so let's test. We've got one probe on the ground shielding, so that's pin number 1. So that's what we want. We want to hear continuity, right? You can definitely check for shorts. If you probe pin 2, you shouldn't be hearing anything. If you probe pin 3, same thing, you shouldn't be hearing anything, right? So 1:1. Hot signal number 2 is to 2. Good. And then cold signal number 3. And then I'm just checking the others for shorts. So at that point, you can definitely close this cable up. Same procedure, go get the chuck, the cable clamp, slide it through. There should be a guide. In this case, for Amphenol, there are guides over here, right? And same thing, on the male connector, there's usually a notch of some sort. And then you can eyeball down the barrel of the casing and line up the notch. Yep. And it should slide through. Pull the boot, twist. As tight as you can, and that's a good connection right there. That's your patch cable. All right, so I'm going to do the other one. And yeah, I think that's about it. All right, guys, that was it. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.